chapter 40. First reading is from Isaiah chapter 40, verses 29 to 31. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the youth will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Second reading is from Psalm 62, verses 5 and 6. For God alone my soul waits in silence, for my hope is from him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken. Well, Jan and Julie would call this a God thing, because not only is the first candle of Advent wreath a symbol of hope, but our bishop, the Reverend Dan Schwiering, has declared 2026 to be a year of hope for the United Methodist Church. So by now you probably figured out what I'm going to talk about. In his November letter, Bishop Schwiering shared his concerns about the challenges some of our churches are facing. He talked about holding on to hope when it is dark. And he said, I love the fact that God is working while it is still dark, and when God's ways are unseen by most of us. The bishop has been particularly impressed by the thoughtful ways that the churches have been handling some of their challenges. He gave the example of a church in Chicago that realized they were spending most of their budget on their building. Well, the congregation prayed and they meditated, and then they sold the building. Since then, they have built a powerful ministry in a nearby nursing home. The woman relating the story to the bishop said, I think we're practicing hope in our community. An amazing story of hope in a time of uncertainty. The bishop signs his letter, Hope to you in the power and love we know as Christ. So I'm going to share a couple of other stories of hope with you. I read a story recently about an elderly gentleman who lived in a city. He lived near a beautiful park, and he loved walking in the park on a regular basis. He basically go out every day and walk in the park. Well, then he began to notice a group of teenage boys that were hanging around in the park. They actually made him a little nervous because they dressed all in their dark hoodies and they had their hoods over their heads so that you couldn't see their faces. And of course, they're teenage boys, right? They're loud and rambunctious. So he was nervous about this. And finally, he realized that he was letting his fears get the best of him, and that unless he did something about it, he would have to give up his walks in the park. So he decided to just introduce himself to the boys and just talk with them. So he approached them rather cautiously and introduced himself. Well, the boys in turn introduced themselves to him, and they began to get acquainted. Soon they were meeting regularly, and the gentleman regaled the boys with stories of his experiences in World War II. They formed such a warm bond that when the man had to go into assisted living, the boys started to visit him there. A social situation that started with fear and misgivings became a warm and comfortable friendship between some unlikely candidates. I believe that's a story of hope, a story of possibilities, a story about what can happen when we let hope be our motivator, and when we have confidence in our God and in the goodness that He instills in all of us. Years ago, I had the privilege of attending a program at Hazelton, a very well-known drug and alcohol treatment center. I listened to a fellow tell the story of his life. I don't remember his name, after all, it was 45 years ago. So I'll just call him James. James described how he had grown up and gone to college. And like all good college students, he drank rather robustly during those college years. Unlike other students who graduated from college, started families, and tapered off their drinking levels, James continued to drink heavily. He drank so heavily that the alcohol consumed him, and he eventually became homeless. He was literally sleeping in the streets. Then he says one day his sister found him, reached out her hand to him and said, "Come with me." Now, I can tell you from experience that men do not listen to their sisters. But James had fallen to such a low point in his life that a small part of his brain told him to follow her. He entered treatment and he attained sobriety. And at the time he was telling us his story, he had just been chosen Teacher of the Year for the state of Minnesota, for the entire state. From the gutter to Minnesota Teacher of the Year. Now, listening to this story, you might be concentrating on James and his miraculous recovery, right? However, I'd like you to take a minute to think about his sister, because I think she represents the heart of this story. Over the years of watching his deterioration, she held on to hope for her brother's ability to recover, and she acted on that hope. She brought her hope to her brother, laid it before him, and the rest is history. Her belief in her brother enabled him to take the necessary steps to recovery. Her hope changed not only his life, but the lives of those around him. This week's storm brought out examples of hope right here in our little community. The town opened the community center for those who didn't have heat. Louise Minison and her helpers served Thanksgiving dinner at the community center on Thursday, despite all the storm raging around them and the outings all around. Eric Benke opened the Great Northern Motel for people whose homes were without heat and no way to keep them warm. And the Yukon Inn served meals to workers who gave up their Thanksgiving holiday to to restore power to our area. People opened up their homes to friends and relatives who had no heat. They shoveled out driveways. They watched over homes of neighbors who were out of town for the holidays. They cut away down trees. People helping people. I can think of no better examples of hope. Last week, Irv said, "We are the kingdom." We're also hope. Every smile, every handshake, every prayer, every helping hand is hope. I think there's a lot of ways to think about the concept of hope, and here's a framework that came to my mind as I thought about this talk. The first kind of hope I'm thinking is quote unquote self-centered hope. This is when we hope for outcomes for ourselves. Now I'm guessing this is a very common, maybe the most common type of hope. I hope I make it to my appointment on time. I hope I win that raffle basket. I hope my medical tests are all normal. I hope that cake I'm baking for coffee hour turns out. I hope my children come home for Christmas. And on and on. Now, another category of hope would be the same kinds of hopes, but these hopes are aimed at others. And this is common too. These hopes are other-centered rather than self-centered. So things like, I hope she gets home safely. I hope he recovers quickly from his surgery. I hope her cancer has been cured. I hope they can work out their marital problems. Though we're now outside of ourselves, we're still making a list of hopes for certain outcomes. These hopes are concrete, they're definable, and they're measurable. And we may be disappointed when these hopes are not fulfilled. Sometimes we're just mildly irritated, other times it's despairing. And of course, we're thrilled if the hopes are answered. I'm labeling these first two kinds of hope human hopes or earthly hopes. Finally, a third kind of hope is spiritual hope. My spiritual hope is in a God who created me in her image. A God who walks by my side throughout my entire life and doesn't give up on me regardless of how miserably I fail. A God who loves me in spite of myself. A God who listens to my despair and cheers me when I rejoice. And a God who has something good for me when I'm through with this earthly life. This spiritual hope then leads us right up to Advent and to the story of Christmas. A newborn baby lying in a manger. So much hope and love poured into that tiny piece of humanity. The Christmas story reflects God's hope in us. Such vast hope that he's willing to give his only son for our benefit. God sent his son to teach us how to live and then to bring us salvation when we die. And sometimes I find it hard to wrap my brain around that much love, that much hope. I scarce can take it in. I marvel that there is a God who believes in me so much that he would do all that for me. So this Advent season, as I put up a Christmas tree and string up outdoor lights and make cookies and send a few greeting cards, I'm going to take time to reflect on this amazing love that God has for me. I'm going to take some quiet time and allow myself to feel God's tremendous love surrounding me and wrapping me in its warmth. And I will be at peace. My hope is that you, too, will take the time to feel the power of God's love in your life this Advent season, and that the hope you carry in your heart gives you strength and peace. Amen.